Listen up, get ready, I'm not gonna take no more. There's a revolution, a revelation going on in my soul. Buckle up, get ready, we're not gonna sit there.
Okay, welcome back to Live from the Heartland for the week of May 15th, and I'm still Michael James. And our next guest is someone who I got to know because he's a big, tall guy and he stands up above a bunch of people when I would see him at various shows. And we're talking about not various shows by a lot of bands, but mainly by Twin Peaks. And some of you know that Twin Peaks is a band that's close to my heart. They originally came out of our basement here. My son, Cadian, is one of the 5 members. And a few years ago, the pandemic hit and they were moving on up and all of a sudden they disappeared. I would tell people, I would tell the band, I said, you guys should do one more show. At least people want to know what happened to you. I was the last to know when they ended up booking 3 days at Thalia Hall. That has evolved into 8 days. And that it began when we are now going live on Friday. It began last night. But really, we're looking forward to it. And it's still on Wednesday. So our first guest is Josh Terry. Hello, Josh. Sorry for that long introduction, but it's great to have you back on Live from the Heartland.
Michael, thank you so much for having me. It's always a pleasure to be on the show.
Tell us officially what your job title is, because I mangled it a little bit.
Yeah, I'm a newsletter producer for WTTW News, which is the PBS affiliate here in Chicago. I work with the producers on Chicago Tonight, which is Monday through Friday at 5:30 p.m. I also, in my spare time, I run a music website, culture blog, weekly newsletter called No Expectations. That's where I kind of cover the under the radar musicians in Chicago, the United States, and around the world. Just whatever I'm into at the moment. Every Thursday, you get the No Expectations newsletter in your inbox. But at PBS, I also run the Daily Chicagoan email newsletter, which has the top stories of the day from WTTW, and that Monday through Saturday, that's in your inboxes as well, which you should all sign up for.
How did you end up in this position, being a reporter and putting out all these newsletters and dealing with the news?
Well, I mean, going back to 2012, I was a student at Loyola and also a Heartland Cafe regular. So, I think moving to Chicago in 2009, you're exposed to so much music, so much organic art happening, pretty much every neighborhood. So the more I got to explore the city, the more going to concerts became a regular part of my life. I didn't study journalism at Loyola. I was hoping to become a therapist. And then my senior year, I got an internship at a news organization, the pop culture website, the AV Club, and decided I liked that. I liked writing. I liked talking about things that I'm into more than I liked the prospect of going to grad school and being at school for another several years. So I decided upon graduation to become a freelance journalist. And 14 years later, here I am.
With a regular gig.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a lot of different regular gigs. I was at the Tribune for a few years, the national website Vice for about 4 years, and also various other freelance publications and websites. It's been a long journey, but it's been cool to end up at a place like WTTW.
Yeah, WTTW is great. As I recall, you wrote for Rolling Stone too.
Yeah, I freelanced for them for a little bit, probably around 7 or 8 years ago.
Well,
yeah.
There was a time when we read that every week or whenever it came out, but it's been a long time, to be honest. I read a lot of newsletters. So when we first met, it was at a Twin Peaks show, and you're one of my go-to people for music reporting. And I wonder if you want to talk a little bit about all the great music that this great blue city has. I mean, it's really something special. There was a time when a lot of musicians would leave to go to the two coasts. Things are supposedly better, but we've got all kinds of things happening, whether it's recording studios, big shows, concerts, festivals, little clubs filled. It's something else. What do you think about all that?
Yeah, I mean, I think I was very lucky in choosing this career path because, Chicago, compared to most other cities, has probably the most self-sustaining, organic, and eclectic arts community in the country, let alone the world. And, it's kind of always been like that. Think of any kind of beloved American genre. Chances are it either started or flourished in the city, like throughout its history. And when I moved here in 2009, I was exposed to house shows. Chicago. One of the great things about Chicago is that we have dozens of small independent venues that aren't owned by big corporations, where younger bands can kind of test out their songs and develop an audience over time. From starting my Chicago journey in Rogers Park, that was how I first discovered Twin Peaks. They were a few years younger than I was. They were in high school and I was in college, but their shows were incredible. And over time, you just got to see them become a worldwide touring act and a big draw. And it was really cool starting my journalism career as that band was on the ascent. It wasn't just Twin Peaks. There was also a burgeoning hip hop community in Chicago. Artists like Chance the Rapper, Vic Mensa, No Name, Jamila Woods were all kind of on the ascent too. And one of my first jobs as a reporter in Chicago was with Red Eye Chicago, which at the time was the Tribune's free daily paper. And my job was to basically just explore the city and talk about every cool movement in music that was happening around Chicago. And it turns out I had so much to cover.
Yeah, well, there's still a lot to cover. And one of the things that you mentioned was younger bands getting a shot. And I remember going to some early Twin Peaks shows, DIY shows in backyards and that kind of thing. What were some of the bands that were around then, and are there any of them still around? It's been like almost 10 years.
Yeah, I mean, well, a lot of them are still around. One that wasn't particularly floored by back then is actually reuniting as well to open up the Twin Peaks reunion shows. One of my formative experiences was, I think, in 2013, 2014, seeing an indie rock band in Chicago called Knee High. They had such a unique way of playing guitar. They had dual vocals. It was like a punk show, but it was also very tuneful. The songs were anthemic and memorable. And they also just had amazing stage presence, and they would play DIY venues like Animal Kingdom with Twin Peaks. And Knee High actually disbanded in 2017. But for their first show in almost a decade, they are kicking off the 8-night run with Twin Peaks. There were so many interesting bands back in the day. There was a lot of garage rock, but I think as the scene progressed, there's been more kind of experimental and fusions of genres with the younger generation. Let's keep in mind that this young generation of bands, and many of them are opening up for Twin Peaks during this 8-night run, this is the first generation of artists where they have kind of free access to all recorded music. We grew up on record stores and buying CDs. These kids have heard everything because they can just go through it on streaming. So the music kind of reflects this very eclectic well of influences that they're all drawing from.
Well, I've gotten to know the Twin Peaks parents over the years. I spent a lot of time following them around the country after we sold the Heartland Cafe. And it was one of the most wonderful times in my life, to be honest with you. I forget where I was going with that, but what are some of the experiences you had following Twin Peaks around?
Yeah, I mean, they were one of the first bands I ever wrote about. I was working for a website called Consequence of Sound at the time. And, I had such a fondness for them from just seeing them around the neighborhood. Katie, before I knew Cadian was in a band, he was just kind of the tall neighborhood kid that I would see wandering around Rogers Park. And then, the more I wrote about them, I reviewed a Wild Onion for the AV Club, I think in 2014. And then when I got the Red Eye gig, I interviewed them several times. These residency shows, the reunion shows at Thalia Hall, are for the 10-year anniversary of their third LP, Down in Heaven. And I did a big cover story on them, actually 2 cover stories that year. The first one was talking about the making of the record and why it was, in my opinion then, their best yet. And then later on that year, the band Cadian actually invited me to hop in the van with them for a week and tour the Midwest and write a story about the realities of what it means to be a touring band. Granted, I'm really happy for those experiences, and I'm happy with how the story came out. It was, while it was work for me, we all had a really, really spectacular time for that week.
There's some probably late nights in those days.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd be amazed if these guys, now that they're in their 30s, can stay up for 8 shows late at night, because I'm thinking a lot of them go to bed early. Earlier you were talking about the influences on bands and how they, older gen. I remember going to record stores and hanging out. You could take the record in a little booth and play it, all that kind of stuff. And the younger generation have so much access to music. One of the things I've always said about Twin Peaks, getting to know their parents over, number of years, was their dads and moms, because some of them were joined, had great record collections. And I remember Cadian as a young guy walking around the house with his guitar and picking out Burning Ring of Fire, and just, so there was country influences. There was Sam Cooke, there was just a lot of people. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, in my reporting on them and also later on becoming really good friends with everyone in the band, it is an amazing collection of people, not just in their diverse music tastes, as your Cadian's father, I'm sure he's recommended, Japanese records from the 70s where
he certainly has.
And then you talk to Clay, and one thing that I noticed from being in the van and on tour with them is that Clay is reading all of the time, classic novels. And it's just so fascinating to see his sense of humor and kind of the writing from these novelistic greats kind of factor into the lyrics. Same with Jack. Jack is kind of my go-to person for punk music. We love kind of loud, aggressive rock music. He's also really into hip hop, and it's just getting to know these people and seeing not just the growth of their art, but also the growth of themselves as people, especially during this hiatus. When, as you know, the thing that you're into in your 20s isn't going to be the thing that's going to define the rest of your life. I'm lucky in the sense that I found writing and I love it and I still love it, but I do know that there is life outside of my one job. I love art, but it's also I think a lesson of my 20s is that there are other things to nurture and to be curious about that isn't just your 9 to 5, or in the band's case, their 9 to 5.
Yeah, no, I was really disappointed when they basically said it's over, and I would keep bringing it up, as I think I mentioned earlier. You got to do one more show for all these people. They want to know what happened to you. And Cadian would just say, "No, Dad, it's over." And then all of a sudden, here they come again. And they've been rehearsing. They've been in Indiana. They've been in Chicago, up in Wisconsin, wherever people are in the band. So we've got these guys. 4 of the 5 of them have names that begin with a C. And Jack is actually, I think, opening a coffee house over somewhere west of here. You got any info on that?
Yeah, it's on Addison and Damon. It just opened up, which is a couple weeks before, or a week or two before their residency. It's kind of everything in their lives are all happening at the same time. Yeah, I've yet to. I used to live right around the corner from the. It's called Dots Cafe, I want to say. Yeah, Jack's been really excited about it, and it's been cool to just see what everyone has been doing in their spare time. Both Clay and Colin have been on national tours with other acts like Waxahachie and Kevin Morby. Everyone's getting married or engaged, and it's been, I think, as much as I was bummed as a fan to experience this hiatus, I never really pressured them to get back together, because I knew that they had things that the pandemic, whether they liked it or not, kind of gave them an opportunity to do.
Yeah, I remember when the pandemic hit and their last album had come out, they were doing a lot of interviews, and then all of a sudden it just sort of slipped away. And Cadian he was living at home during the pandemic, and I remember he got into cooking.
Yeah.
And we ate good food. I'll tell you, not only does his mom, my wife Paige, make some nice dishes. I claim I can cook too. I did have a restaurant, but Katie really got into it. Josh, Terry, what do you make of the response to them coming back out? There have been a number of articles, more than I have been able to read. Some people are talking it up. I still run into people who've never heard of them. So it's a mixed bag.
Yeah, when I've covered a lot of bands, and I've been doing this long enough to cover bands, see them break up, and then see them get back together. With Twin Peaks, I've never seen 8 consecutive nights sold out. Usually it's like a band will reunite in their hometown and play 1 or 2 shows, maybe do a tour. But the excitement from this reunion is so palpable. These 8 shows, that's kind of unheard of. I thought it was crazy when Twin Peaks were doing 3 nights in a row 10 years ago. So it's really exciting. And I think it's surprised. I don't know if I was necessarily surprised. I think, as a friend of the band and as someone who is a journalist and has covered them for, a long time, the one the one question that I got most isn't anything about my actual work. It would be, when are Twin Peaks reuniting? Do you have any inside info? I would always keep a tight lip because I also didn't know until it was, until they were really seriously talking about bringing the band back together for Thalia Hall. But I cannot wait. I'm going to at least 2 of the shows this run, the first night and I think Tuesday.
Well, yeah. I hope to see you there. My hope is I'm going to make all 8 shows, but I am in my 80s, and sometimes I'll fall asleep while walking. We'll see.
I'm like, I think I can only handle 2.
Do you have handy any of the other bands that are playing with them next week? After this show goes up on Friday morning, the 15th, there are a number of shows. Now, these shows are all sold out, although I think there are a few tickets that go on sale each day.
So yeah, I am I'm a fan of every opening act that they have brought on. And I think it's like such a reflection of like the community that the members of Twin Peaks kind of established while they were touring and recording. There's Vivi Lightbody, who is singing backup vocals for them during this run. There's younger generations of bands like Lifeguard, Free Range, and Neptune's Core. There's a band that was, I was seeing in the same rooms when Twin Peaks were starting out, Post Animal, who are closing out the run, I think. And then through a member of Post Animal, Joe Keery, that was how Twin Peaks got connected to Finn Wolfhard, the Canadian actor who is also a great musician in his own right. And he's playing as well. So it's sort of like, I view this as a celebration of the past. You have Knee High, a band that's reuniting for 1 night only. Well, maybe not 1 night only, but to open up the run. And then you have these younger generations of bands that were clearly inspired by Twin Peaks. And you have the bands that, the members of Twin Peaks nurtured along the way. Like, it's a very cool celebration. I wish I could do all 8, but I think.
Well, I'll probably see you there. Any other musical news or other news that you are aware of that you would like to share for the last minute of this first segment of Live from the Heartland? Yeah,
I think what's been really cool about this run, they haven't been active in 6 years. I think, treating music as something local, being curious, exploring and finding new artists at the small venues in your city is such a great way to experience art. It's more interesting than just tuning into a radio station or watching a late night performance. And I think, this is going to be a celebration of what makes Chicago a nurturing music community. We have cheap rent, independent press, a ton of independent venues for people to see live music. And even when bands like take a break, there's still excitement, and I think that's such a reflection of Chicago and Twin Peaks.
Where did you grow up?
I was from Grand Rapids, Michigan.
Oh, that's close.
Both my folks are from the Chicago area or Illinois. And so I was raised on Chicago sports, always knew I would end up here, but I can't claim to be a Chicagoan.
Well, our sports report for this week is the Cubs are in first place. The White Sox are in second, only a game and a half out. They play 3 games together starting on Friday night, the 15th. Josh, I'm going to read something that I think my wife Paige got from the Twin Peaks website. I'm not sure who wrote it, but I think it'll be a good way to sum up our discussion. Here I go. Maybe the truest thing about Twin Peaks is also the most obvious one. They started out calling themselves Friend. The drummer grew up across the street from the bassist. The singer's earliest musical project was a duo with his brother. The keyboard player joined gradually enough that it didn't quite feel like joining. These are not the social dynamics of a band pointed toward implosion. These are the dynamics of people who want to be in the same room. We Will Not Make It, parenthesis, not without you, is a song that confesses something. To the fans, to the friends in the crowd, to themselves, we need each other. The thing we have is real. This is what endures. That they're playing it and whatever else 8 nights at Thalia Hall will produce is not a comeback in any industry sense of the world. It's something harder to manufacture and therefore more worth your time. And then they add, lucky if you have a ticket. If not, there's a live stream of the May 18th and 19th sets available. Josh Terry, I hope you come on this show again. I know you followed the rules. You had to get permission from your job. And I encourage you to be a rebel wherever you are, but you're doing great work, and I want to thank you again.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it, Michael. It's always a blast to be on here.
And everyone.